Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about the new Jaume Collet-Serra film, the director of Nonstop, The Shallows, House of Wax. He's done a couple of big films. He has his new film that's out now. It's entitled The Woman in the Yard. This film is sparking a lot of controversy online based off of its sensitive subject matter that it covers. But I am here to review for you today kind of what I thought of the film, kind of what I got out of it. I'm going to try to keep it as spoiler free as I can, as I usually do with most of my movie reviews. But I do want to kind of give you my interpretation of how I felt about the film and where it works, where it doesn't work, and all that good stuff. So, for those who don't know anything about The Woman in the Yard, basically it's a film where a family moves into this farmhouse and there is a death in the family recently. The father of these two children has passed away, and the wife is really grieving about it. She has a hard time getting out of bed. She suffers from depression herself. And so it's a very difficult death to get over, and so they're still trying to adjust to this, farmhouse that they've purchased recently. And things kind of get turned upside down for this family when they see this woman outside in their yard who's sitting in a chair and has this black smock over her body, and it's basically hiding her appearance, and they don't know what she looks like and things like that. And so the house actually has no power that morning when this happens. And so basically, this family is not only trying to deal with this person, but they're also trying to go without power, basically deplete. They've had their phones depleted overnight. They didn't charge them overnight. And so as a result, not only were their phones low battery, but they're so low battery they really can't make any kind of phone calls to 911 or anything. So basically, their phones are out of the question at this point. The son hurt or broke his or something like that, according to what the mom said early on in the movie. And so they're dealing with this woman in the yard. They don't know who she is or what she wants. She won't even tell them what her name is. And over the course of this film, a lot of tension builds in this family. Like I said, the mom suffers from depression. Lashes out at her kids quite a bit. Still dealing with the loss of her husband and things like that. She's also overcoming an injury because of this car crash that the husband died from, and so because she was involved with the crash herself, she's still getting over those injuries that she got from the car crash. And so over the course of this film, we find out who exactly this woman in the yard is, why the mom is grieving as much as she is, why she's dealing with depression as much as she is, how the kids interpret all this, how they interpret the whole woman in the yard situation, and what's going to come of this family, whether this woman is this bad intruder or whether they do overcome the situation, and what exactly the family does moving forward. But overall, guys, I thought The Woman in the Yard was an okay film. There's tons of great things to love about it. There's certainly some things about it that I think are very strong. Jaume Collet-Serra, if I'm pronouncing his name right, does have another strong directorial effort here. There is some negatives along the way that keep this from being a great film, unfortunately. So it's not quite on the same level as, like I say, a Nonstop or The Shallows, because I think those are his two better films. But I think it's certainly much better than, say, like Jungle Cruise or Run All Night or something where it's not quite as strong visually or strong conceptually. So I think The Woman in the Yard succeeds in certain areas, but also not doing so well in other areas. So for my positives and negatives of this film, first and foremost, this film builds suspension really, really well. Just the way Collet-Serra builds his suspense in the film, how we really don't know what this woman wants until, that's revealed way late in the film. Just how the suspension is built, how things are happening throughout this morning before this, even the woman is discovered in this yard, and how he builds towards that, how he builds towards tension amongst the family, how the teenage son doesn't exactly get along with the mom very well, how the young daughter is trying to make sure that the family's kind of, you know, acknowledging her coloring book and that she's spelling things correctly, and she's getting to the age where she has to learn how to spell the words properly on certain things during her homework assignments. And so just the way that the suspense is built throughout this film I thought was very well done. It really does kind of keep you on the edge of your seat throughout the course of this film. Another positive I have with the film was the film's visual use of shadows. How this woman in the yard character kind of has this supernatural ability to, hit chandeliers with her finger and be able to, do things where even if she's outside the house, her shadow, the way that she's able to overcome a room and, take control of that room and, really make sure that when everything's kind of, when, you when all this stuff is happening at once, um, how um, how things are visualized in this film I thought was very strong. So like I said, the use of shadows are very effective here, and it really does bring a nice visual flair to this film. Another positive I have with the film was the scary villain that the film had. When we do kind of learn more about the woman in the yard, what she wants and all this other stuff, and when we get to see this character basically essentially be this villainous character in this film, it's very scary. It's very sorry, my neighbors are being kind of loud. So it's a very scary villain in this film, and the way that the villain is depicted in this film I thought was very strong. Definitely probably one of the better, because Blumhouse produced this film, and they're known for doing horror films in general. Just the way that the villain is depicted in this film I thought was very scary and very effective. So I thought that aspect of the story was very effective in this film. I also thought the overall story setup and starting point in the film, starting in this farmhouse, starting without power in the house, nobody's, phone is working properly. So I thought the overall setup of the film and the starting point of the film I thought were very strong here. So how the story gets set up and how it gets going at the beginning I thought was very effective for the most part. I also do over like this farmhouse environment overall. I thought the environment that they took place in does kind of feel like this urban neighborhood where it's kind of out in the country somewhere. It does feel like something, because I live in the state of Wisconsin, it does feel like something where, when you go in the right neighborhood, the right route to go see like a friend or a family, it does feel like something you would see in like your everyday life, specifically if you live in a state like that. So I like the overall farmhouse environment, what it brings to the table, how, their neighbors are kind of far away from each other because they live next to this cornfield and stuff. And just the overall environment that the film takes place in was pretty effective for the most part. But for my negatives of this film, unfortunately, this film has way too many plot twists. It is one of those films where it is almost trying to be too clever for its own good. It really just needs one big plot twist, not several of them. So it does kind of go on this tangent of trying to overly impress you with all these different plot twists, whether it is who the woman in the yard represents. Is she really a character? Is she a metaphor? What's going on with the mom? What's going on with the daughter? Is there really something deeper? Does the mom truly believe in the daughter and not the son? And all this other stuff that happens, in the third act of the film. It feels like it's trying to impress you with all these plot twists. And like I said, it really just needs the one. And it really doesn't need, 4 or 5, several different big plot twists. So rather than, trying to impress us with several of them, it really just needs one big one to kind of throw us a curveball and really kind of be impressed with the material. But as a result, I feel because there is so many plot twists, it feels like it can't really make up its mind on what kind of film it wants to be, unfortunately. And then it goes into my next negative. Unfortunately, this film just isn't as clever as it thinks it is. It is one of those films where it thinks it is so impressive. It is think it's trying to throw you this impressive plot twist to kind of throw everything on its head. And unfortunately, it just kind of makes the film feel kind of messy. And it's just one of those films, too, where the second it introduces one plot twist, everything else that you saw before that plot twist doesn't make any sense anymore. It is one of those films where it really can't decide, what's a metaphor, what's a character. Is this something that all the characters in the film we've been introduced to can see? Or is this something where we're seeing it from one character's perspective, but as a result, we're witnessing what that character thinks that everybody else is witnessing too. And so it is one of those films where it does get confusing, what's a metaphor, what's a character, what's this one thing supposed to represent, what's that supposed to represent. And it just kind of gets lost in its own story. And like I mentioned before, this film has tons of metaphors, tons of dream sequences. There's just a bunch of scenes where you kind of have to question, what's real, what's not. There's even scenes where you'll see a dream sequence and then like the character's shoes will have mud on them and stuff. So there's indications that what you just witnessed could possibly have just happened, but it's hard to tell if that character woke up from the dream or woke up after this character just did the thing that we just saw them do from the scene from previously. And there's just a lot of scenes where you kind of have to question, what's reality and what's a dream sequence. And there's times where I feel like even the film itself really can't answer those questions very well. And for the most part, too, I understand, building suspense and building the tension and having a slow burn for something. But I do feel like the first act of this film is very, very slow. It's just a lot of scenes where we really kind of have to make it to the next plot point, and it's just one of those things where there's just a lot of time spent where it's just kind of dead space of, the family complaining, nobody's really being likable. It's just kind of this really slow transition from one major plot point to the next. And I just felt like Act One felt a little too slow, unfortunately. It was also kind of unclear if the main villain of the film, the woman in the yard, has superpowers or not. It is one of those things where there is a lot of questions and scenarios and twists thrown at us. It's kind of hard to say whether this is a character with superpowers or because, we're interpreting this from one character's point of view. It's just kind of hard to feel what the director's trying to tell us. Does the character have superpowers? Is this just a metaphor character? But if it is a metaphor character, how come other characters can have clear interactions with this person? So there's just a lot of scenes where one thing conflicts with another, and it just feels like nothing really has a cohesive vision overall for the film, unfortunately. And it's just one of those films too where there's just a lot of characters that we're introduced to that we really don't like very much. I guess for the brief time you get to learn the father from flashbacks and so forth, I guess he's kind of likable, but it is one of those things where, the mom is a very unlikable person. She's not the greatest parent. There's things that she does that makes her very unlikable. The teenager is very, angsty and very rebellious. So there's times where even he's mean and you really don't like him very much either. And even though the young daughter's trying to, uplift everybody and keep things optimistic, have imaginary friends, talk to her toy penguin and stuff, there's just not a lot of characteristics that make me want to like these characters. And I feel like a lot of people are going to have that same issues. There's just not a lot of characters to root for necessarily in this film. But overall, I'm going to give The Woman in the Yard a 7.5 out of 10. I think there's admirable things about it. I think it definitely does touch on some sensitive topics that I can't get into too much detail on because it could be spoilers. But it does build suspense well. Its visual uses of shadows are very effective. It does have a scary villain here. And like I said, Blumhouse has a ton of scary villains to work with. And for this one to be probably one of their scarier ones in a while is really saying something. The overall story setup and starting point of the film is very strong. And I like that farmhouse environment, but like I said, there's tons of negatives here along the way too that prevent this from being a great film. So it is a 7.5 out of 10 for me. It's an okay film. I would say see it at your own risk if the trailer's really intrigued you. If not, I think you can wait to rent this one. I don't think it's a very necessary viewing at all. So like I said, 7.5 out of 10 for me. It's okay. I would say see it with caution if it intrigues you enough.